everyone, it's Kim, and welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. Welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. If you're new to my channel, a special hello. And if you're returning to my channel, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date when I post new content. I am predominantly a nonfiction booktuber specializing in the world of food writing. Food writing can be anything from the history of an avocado to the impact global trade has had on coffee. And today I'm here to bring you not a chef memoir, but the memoir or book from Tom Vitale, who was the long-standing producer with Anthony Bourdain. So his book, In the Weeds, Around the World, Behind the Scenes with Anthony Bourdain, came out in August of 2021. So In the Weeds comes in at 284 pages, but I actually listened to this as an audiobook because the author himself, Tom, narrated it. I always, and I've preached this before, but if you can get an author who's willing to read or narrate their own audiobook, I think there is a level of emotional impact that you're not going to always get from the text. But I'm really glad I own this. This was one of two books that came out in 2021 about Anthony Bourdain, who died by suicide in 2018. So the other book that came out is Bourdain, a Biography, but the two books came out in 2021 all about Anthony Bourdain. The other book, and I'll put the picture here, is Anthony Bourdain, a Biography, which was written by Bourdain's longtime personal assistant. This book, Tom Vitale, was, I think that's how you say his last name, Tom Vitale. He was the longstanding producer with Anthony Bourdain, including No Reservations, if you remember that show, and his final show, Parts Unknown, that was done by CNN. So up front, the trigger warning here is that Bourdain has died by suicide, and that is what opens the book. This is really about Tom, who built his entire career around Anthony Bourdain. When Tom, and you learn this throughout the book, it's not a very linear story. It's actually, a lot of it's going backwards. So Tom's career starts in his early 20s as pretty much a lowly production assistant, and he's essentially built his career with Anthony Bourdain. Eventually he finally pushes and gets to be someone who goes on the adventures with Bourdain around the world. And this book is, I think, a very healing thing for Tom, but also really brings you behind the scenes of how you make one of these global documentary TV shows. I think the first thing, before going into what the book covers, is that this is one of many books that came out after Bourdain died by suicide. And I, as a huge fan, have read, if not owned, almost all of the books ever published about Bourdain, except for some unofficial biographies, because that's just really not I don't like unofficial things. It can feel a little... The man died by suicide. He had a lot of problems. But Tom, having spent the majority of his adult life with Anthony Bourdain, I really wanted to pick up this book and see what it's about. I also have a background in film and television, so there's a part of me that really is interested about the mechanics of how you build a show that involves traveling all over the world and finding runners and people native to the land you're traveling to. So there was a lot to really see behind the scenes. But this is definitely an example of a book where it's not always the best thing to meet your heroes. I think that's a song lyric, or it's probably been used a bunch of times, but don't meet your heroes, they're all fucking zeros, I think is specifically a lyric from Halsey. And part of me felt very bittersweet going into this book because it did really show you some of the darker sides of Tony Bourdain. And the more information you gather, sometimes it feels like you have a little bit of a revisionist history, or you go back to the TV shows you watched with him and you realize now, you view the episodes with a new lens, because there is a lot in here that is very eye-opening. There are moments where you go, wow, that was a red flag, or wow, that was really, really messed up. And this doesn't make me not love Anthony Bourdain. I just think that if you're going to go into this book, Tom is showing you his unique and very specific relationship with Tony. Tom's job as the executive producer, or one of the producers, excuse me, is to get Tony to talk on camera, to bring out those poignant stories, that narrative element that really is what made Tony Bourdain who he is. And it wasn't always easy. And it sometimes involves manipulating the scene or pushing when it's uncomfortable. I actually found it quite sad at times to read this book because I think Tom so desperately wanted to be liked by Tony, stemming from this child-like idolhood of Tony. And the more Tom writes this book and looks back on his life, I think by the end of the book and the final notes, he also realizes that his hero was a very troubled and flawed individual. If you haven't already, I highly also recommend watching the documentary that came out last year, Roadrunner, all about Tony Bourdain, to really further pull from the mystique. So if you think back of what made Tony famous at the very beginning, it was the book Kitchen Confidential, and he was the pinnacle of the bad boy chef. And from there, if you read his own books, if you read books like this, you see how much farther and how terrible it was to actually be labeled a bad boy chef when Tony suffered from tons of other things. I mean, is he ever officially diagnosed? No, but like, this is a very troubled individual. And it was hard to read at times. It was hard to read at times. Putting that aside, and putting that disclaimer or this... So while there is this undercurrent of grief that Tom is going through as the narrator, and as there is a moment of really unpacking what it means to have met your hero, worked with your hero, and now your hero, who you've essentially built your whole life around, is no longer there. This is a whole part of the book, that grieving cycle. There is a lot that shows you the behind the scenes stories. You get taken with Tom and Tony to various parts of the world, including moments where So besides that undercurrent, you do get to go into the past with Tom and really explore some pinnacle moments for Tom, Tony, and the team, including when they go to Hanoi and they meet in a Hanoi cafe with President Barack Obama, and what that meant for Tom versus what it meant for Tony. And throughout the book, throughout the chapters of this book, you're taken on different journeys throughout the world and different parts unknown, and the transition from no reservations to parts unknown. And there are some real highlights, like the moment they go to the Hanoi cafe with President Barack Obama. You get to see how stressful it is for Tom to try and control a scene, especially with someone as important as the president. But you also get to see how Tony reacts to having people who want to be on camera guests, and he's not quite sure why people want to be on camera with him, whether it's Sean Penn, Barack Obama, even chefs that he's worked with before. I think Eric Ripert is the one exception because he and Eric were very close friends. It was really fun to be in those moments, and really just some of the absurdity that comes along with it. There are moments that they take a boat down the Congo, and it's so amazing, and it makes me want to go back and watch the show again and really see how different I interpret those specific episodes that he covers in the book. I haven't done that yet because I hesitate to watch Anthony Bourdain on screen knowing he's not alive anymore. And I don't know why I have a reaction to this individual this way versus other Hollywood actors, or, well, Tony wasn't a Hollywood actor, but do you know what I mean? Like a on-camera presence. I think like I can go watch Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart's been dead for years. He's a famous Hollywood actor. Or even Betty White, who more recently passed away. But there's something about Tony Bourdain that it's very hard to go back and watch on film. And I don't know if it's because he did die by suicide, or because the more I read, it's a very troubled book, or he was a very troubled person. I'm not quite sure. I do think that this book isn't all down and like Tony's a terrible person. I just want to make that also super clear in this book, is that you also get to see a very generous side of Tony Bourdain, how much he cared for his crew. He remembered his crew's kids' birthdays. And there are moments where you do get insight to why Tony was so fascinated by the world and how he approached things, what gave him this prosaic kind of, I think that's a word, prosaic, what gave him this outlook on life. And I think it's really important to also mention that in the book, that you're not just going to get bombarded with grief. You're going to get stories, and some of them are absolutely outrageous. Like they go to like a margarita bar and there's stories. They go drinking with businessmen in East Asia. There's tons of moments that had me laughing out loud. It is a bittersweet story, and I think that is because Tom is grieving this. He wrote this in the months / year and a half after Tony died, and he had to figure out what the next step in his life was going to be. And there is no golden final chapter where he's now producing something else. Honestly, I looked him up on IMDb. I don't know what Tom Vitale is doing right now in terms of his career, what his next step is going to be. And this is very much a book about him processing live what it means to lose somebody so important to him. So to end this review, I do want to say it is very much worth reading. It's probably one of the most impactful books about Anthony Bourdain I have read so far. And in closing, let me just read the back of the book for you. I don't know if my life ended or if it began when I started working with Tony. Whatever the hell I did for a living was so vivid and spectacular, it all but consumed me. Then, without warning, it was over forever, reduced to nothing more than a memory. What follows is my best attempt to paint an honest picture of my experiences traveling with Tony, the highs and the lows, and the bizarre as shit situations in which we constantly found ourselves. I think he sums it up the best on that back blurb, is that you will see high highs with Tony and low lows, but I highly recommend that if you were a fan of Bourdain to pick up In the Weeds by Tom Vitale. You can also listen to it as an audiobook, which I actually really do recommend, so you can get Tom's voice himself. That is my review. And if you are interested in other foodie bookish reviews, I really recommend you hit like and subscribe below. I post content every week, and if you want to keep up live with what I'm reading, I'll also have links down to my Instagram below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.